Hello and welcome to DE's streamed lesson for Science Week. I'm Matt Wilshire and I'm going to be guiding you through this lesson. The theme for Science Week this year is Change and Adapt. And we're going to be learning all about some amazing adaptations, which is why we've called the session From Scales to Tails, the evolution and adaptation of reptiles. Now, I'm joined today by the lovely Mike Linley. He is our expert zoologist and he's got some amazing reptiles to show us. Thankfully, these creatures are protected and they're looked after by Mike in special conditions here in Norfolk. We're going to be meeting them very soon. Mike is also going to be doing all of the handling today because he knows how to look after them best. There will be different activities for you to complete throughout the lesson, so please fill these in on the handout provided by your teacher or from the DE website. Whilst we prepare some of these creatures, have a discussion with your class. How long have reptiles been roaming the earth? Make a guess. There should be a timeline appearing on the screen to help you with your discussions. Take a moment to do that now. Welcome back. How did you get on with your first discussion question? Now, Mike is going to be able to give us the answer. So, Mike, what's the answer?
Well, the first reptiles appeared 320 or 300 million years ago. So they've been around a long time. And it's because of their ability to adapt and change that they've conquered virtually every habitat on Earth, apart from mountaintops, the deep ocean, and the polar regions. Some are quite small. It's quite surprising. You think of early reptiles as being massive, like dinosaurs and things. Well, some of the early reptiles were actually tiny lizard-like animals. This is Tuatara, which the fossil was found in China. But this is a fully grown lizard, about 15 centimeters long. It lived on the edges of the sea, and it went through the seaweed that was floating on the side, and it was feeding on small fish. And we know it was feeding on small fish because its teeth are all curved backwards. Because when you're trying to catch a slippery fish, you've got to really hold on to them tightly.
Yeah, of course.
We also know that all reptiles lay eggs in some form, and we've found a few of these fossils with two babies inside them to show that the eggs were kept inside the body until they were ready to be laid when they hatched and then swam away. Tiny versions of the adult. We've also got here a fossil of an early dinosaur. Now the dinosaurs sometimes were huge. This one is called Spinosaurus, and it grew to about 15 or 20 meters long, and it was like a massive crocodile-like animal but with flippers. Mm-hmm. So it was like a cross between a sort of dolphin and a crocodile, but it was a reptile, and it lived in the oceans, never came out of the water, and it fed on other reptiles and fish.
And so what came first, the dinosaurs or the reptiles?
Well, they all had a common answer. They all evolved from fish in some way or another. Right. But there were reptiles around before the dinosaurs. And then the dinosaurs really conquered the Earth until a massive meteorite came and 60 million years ago wiped out many of the huge reptiles, many of the huge dinosaurs out. But many of the smaller reptiles survived because they could burrow in the soil, hide in the water, and not lose, you become extinct because of that incredible change to the planet.
Amazing. And you've got another type of fossil there as well?
Crocodiles, the crocodiles that we have today, are very similar to the crocodiles that evolved nearly 200 million years ago. They've changed very little, and that is a sort of tribute to the success of the crocodile design because it lasts so well. Why fix it? Why try and change it if it works well? So the crocodiles today, like fossil crocodiles, every big scale on the back has a bone in it, and that's for added protection. So if they were attacked by anything, it's not just the scales that protect them, there are bones inside their skin that give them that little bit extra armour.
A little bit like a suit of armour for a crocodile.
It is like chainmail, that sort of thing. It's flexible, you know, all the scales can move, but every one has got this solid bone inside it.
So are dinosaurs reptiles?
Yes, dinosaurs are reptiles, and they are related to our modern day reptiles, but they're a separate group. So you've got crocodiles, turtles, tortoises, lizards, snakes, Tuatara. Right. You also have dinosaurs, which came about and then are now extinct. They actually evolved themselves into birds. The modern day birds have got more in common with dinosaurs than the modern day reptiles have with dinosaurs. Yeah, many of the dinosaurs evolved into huge, massive, great animals because a lot of them came out of the sea onto land to eat vegetation. And vegetation millions of years ago was very primitive. If you imagine a big palm tree, for instance, if you're going to eat that, you've got to be big to chew it. You've also got to have a powerful mouth, but you've also got to have a huge stomach because you need time to digest it. And so, even when you look at fossil dinosaur poo now, you can see there is still undigested plant material from these great big thick parts of the cycads and the palm trees that we're eating in those days that actually wasn't digested, and you can still see remains of it in the fossil coprolites or fossil poo that they can find.
Let's take a look at some of the key features of a reptile then to help you with the next stage of that handout. Mike, who have we got here?
We've got a leopard gecko. Obviously it's a lizard. There we go. Now, you may be familiar with this animal because the leopard gecko is one of the most popular pet reptiles that we have in this country. They live a long time, 20 or 30 years, and they breed very readily in captivity, and they're easy to keep. So here it is. This lizard is native to Afghanistan and Pakistan, the drier desert areas, covered in scales to avoid it drying out in the sun. It's cold-blooded. It's hunkering down on my hand here to absorb the warmth of my hand, because normally it'd be sitting out under a rock, which would be warm. So it needs body heat for its body to work properly, but it doesn't make its own like we do. It relies on being in a warm place. It's got 4 legs, quite short in this case. It's a vertebrate. Most lizards have a tail, sometimes a long tail, can be many times the length of its body in some species. This one, it's got a very fat tail.
I was going to say, it's very big.
It's a desert creature. Food is sparse. It stores food when there's plenty in the fat in its tail and lives off that for many, many months during times of famine. It's got a very sensitive tongue. It comes out and it likes to lick a surface, to smell a surface. It's got big eyes. It's nocturnal, so the geckos have big eyes. Also, it can't blink. As a gecko, it can't blink. It's got scales over its eyes, transparent scales, to protect it from the sand and things. And its ears, they look like you could put a stick all the way through one ear, it'll come out the other, but there is a membrane between. But you can actually see light through those ears.
Yes, there's a big hole there, isn't there?
Exactly that. They can hear quite well and feel vibrations. So those are the main features. It lays eggs, usually 2 at a time. Some species don't lay eggs. They keep the eggs in the body. If it's an egg layer, it's called oviparous. If it keeps the eggs in its body, which then hatch when it lays them, it's called viviparous. They still take 2 to 3 months to develop and hatch, whether it's in the sand or inside the female. It still takes about the same length of time. They grow very slowly, and in times of danger, most lizards can actually shed their tail. If a predator was to come and chase it, as it runs away, the first thing it would grab is its tail. It can break off. Every backbone, every vertebrate in the tail has a big crack in it, and it's able to use its muscles to break that bone. The tail will fall off, and it's programmed to wriggle for about 10 minutes. And while the predator is busy chasing and eating that tail, the gecko escapes
Of course, yes.
and grows another one over a
I was
period.
going to ask, so it can grow a new tail again.
There is one species in Yugoslavia, it gets to about a metre long, called a glass lizard. It's legless, and it breaks its tail into about 5 or 6 pieces, which is why it's called a glass lizard, because it looks like someone's dropped it and it's broken into many pieces. And it takes a predator so long to eat all those pieces of its tail that the actual business end with all the body in it escapes and grows another one eventually.
That is incredible. Let's put some of our knowledge into practice now. It's time for our very first activity, so on your handout you need to tick the reptile. Take a look at the different creatures and tick the reptiles that you spot. Best of luck! So here are some of the answers for that first activity. Have a look on the screen now. Now, Mike, could you tell me a little bit more about some of the reptiles we know? And why is an armadillo and a pangolin, why are they not reptiles?
Well, they look like them a bit because they appear to be scaly. The pangolin especially has got overlapping scales, and the armadillo has a very tough, armoured, scaly skin. But they both have hairs, and they're both warm-blooded. And both of those things put them into mammal group.
So usually anything that would have hair is usually
A mammal,
okay.
And mammals and birds are warm-blooded. They make their own body heat, so when you pick those animals up, you can feel that they're warm. The actual scales of a pangolin are made from matted hair that crushed together to form this armour plating.
Wow, oh, I certainly didn't know that. And a newt as well. A newt was on our handout too. It looks a little bit like the gecko here. So is that not a reptile?
It looks like just a small gecko. The big difference is the scales. Reptiles have a scaly skin for adaptation to a life on land. Newts are half amphibious in that they often start off life as a larva, like a tadpole, and then they lose their gills that they use to breathe underwater, they develop lungs, and they come out onto land. That makes them an amphibian. And reptiles don't do that. They've got a hard, scaly skin, and they don't go through a larval stage as part of the process.
I'll take care of the gecko then in the tank. The other creature that was on the handout was the blanus as well. And I know you have an example of a blanus to show us.
I have. I've got it right here. It looks just like a great big worm, but it's a reptile. But it's neither a snake nor a lizard. It's been put in its own group called the amphispinians. And there are lots of these around the world in tropical regions. They're burrowers. This one comes from southern Spain and lives in desert-like conditions, buried in sand, usually under stones. Because it's a burrower, its eyes are covered, and they really are just light detectors. It can't focus or see anything at all, and it feeds mainly on sort of termite larvae, beetle grubs that it finds when it's burrowing around. Some species, the one in Trinidad, gets to over 1/2 metre in length.
Wow.
And is found only inside ant nests, where it feeds on the larvae and young ants inside those.
Well, I really thought it was a worm, but it's moving a lot more like a snake, isn't it?
It is. Again, it's using the warmth of my hands to keep warm. It does lay eggs, elongated eggs, 2 or 3 at a time. And it has a little tongue where it's sort of feeling
I've
and
just seen that tongue popping
comes
out.
out to smell its way around. It's got a long vertebrate, like most reptiles have, and it's covered in scales, and it breathes using lungs.
And you mentioned it lays eggs as well. So does that mean that all reptiles lay eggs, or do some give birth to live young?
All reptiles have eggs, but some retain them inside their body, and then as they lay them, they hatch. So it takes just the same about 3 months for them to develop inside the body of the female, or in a species where it lays the eggs in the soil, it takes them about 3 months to hatch in the sun. This is where the adaptation of reptiles really shows itself, because some creatures have evolved to live in much colder conditions. We have 3 species of reptile in this country which actually keep the eggs inside their bodies because it's so cold here often, the eggs won't hatch if just left outside.
I see.
So they actually carry them around inside their body for 3 months. And the snake or the lizard, so we've got the adder, we've got the common lizard or viviparous lizard, and we've got the slow one, which is a legless lizard. All those, the female sits in the sun to bask in the sun when she's got the eggs inside her. That helps to incubate them, and so they hatch in 3 months as well. As soon as she lays those eggs, they're not in a hard shell, they're in just like a membrane. The membrane splits, and she can give birth to 6, 8 or 10 live. Yeah.
That is absolutely fascinating. Now, there's a lot of information that we've just given you there, so take a moment to digest that and have a go at completing the next part on the handout. How did you get on? Here are the answers to that activity appearing on the screen for you now. We're now going to look at some specific adaptations that different reptiles have made and how this helps them to survive. So Mike, we've got 3 different types of lizard, are they?
Yep.
So how do each of these adapt to survive?
Well, going back to the leopard gecko that we had, which comes from the hot deserts of Pakistan and Afghanistan, that's obviously, like all reptiles, has a waterproof, scaly skin to maintain the moisture inside its body. It also has a fat store in its tail because you can't rely on food in the desert. When there's plenty, they eat a lot, store the fat in the tail. They can survive on that for months and months and months when there's no food available. This is another species of gecko. This is from the hot tropical forests of Madagascar. It comes out during the day, which is unusual for a gecko because most of them are nocturnal, and it's bright green. And its name is the Madagascan green day gecko.
I can see it's very bright.
It's very descriptive. And it runs about the trees. The males are territorial, and they've got these bright red spots, and they can sort of display and chase each other away. They've got very well adapted feet with these sticky sort of pads which allow them to climb up and down surfaces, even vertical and upside down surfaces. Thousands and thousands of tiny hairs seek out little tiny faults in the substrate which they can cling onto. It's very, very clever how they do it. These are similar in that these are geckos with the same sticky feet. These are New Zealand geckos, and these live in a temperate climate, just like ours. New Zealand is very similar to us when it comes to temperatures. They are active all year round. They're active during the day and at night, depending on where they are. But the thing about this gecko, which separates from this gecko, is that because it's not a hot climate, the eggs would not hatch if it laid eggs in the wild.
Right.
It's not warm enough. So they keep the eggs inside the body, just 2 of them, and the female will sit in the sun on warm days and make sure the eggs are safe inside her. And as she lays them, after about 3 months, they hatch. So they actually give birth to live young, even those live young have grown in eggs inside her. This gecko lives in a tropical climate. It lays its eggs on trees mainly, and in crevices in the trees, and it's hot enough there for those eggs to incubate outside the body, and they will again hatch after about 3 months.
And is that why the feet on this gecko here are able to cling on to different surfaces?
Yeah, they can run down even glass, they can go down glass, they can go up trees, leaves, underneath leaves, wherever it wants to be, it can get with those feet. It's very, very clever. There is another gecko. We talk about adaptation and change in reptiles happening over millions of years. Well, there's another gecko that's changed since human beings evolved and built houses. Because if you were to go to the south of France, there's a species of gecko there that you find in and around houses. If you go to Asia, like Singapore, and stay in a hotel, there's a species of gecko there that's only now found in and around houses. And It's actually now called the house gecko. It's attracted to your rooms and balcony at night, where the flies will come into lights and things, and moths can come in, and it will run around the room catching mosquitoes, flies, biting insects, pests in fact, and it can run upside down along the ceiling. And it does make a little noise. It's one of the few reptiles that actually vocalizes, and it goes chit, chit, chit. And so all the locals call it the chit-chat, but it's known as a house gecko because you only ever find it now in and around houses.
That's incredible. And I noticed that this reptile over here, so does this have the same sort of feet as these geckos? Or?
If you don't mind taking the lid off for me, please, Matt. I'll just grab him. This has got a long name. It's called a spiny-tailed mastigueur. The locals in Morocco, where it comes from, call it the dab lizard. So we'll call it the dab lizard for short. It's a vegetarian mainly, so it feeds on sort of plant material, even dry desert plants. And this one will actually eat lentils. It can cope with really tough vegetable matter. It stores again fat in its tail. It's got a very, very fat tail. But look at it now. He's using that tail, he waves it around to knock my hand away. And it's covered in spikes, hence the name spiny-tailed. And also it digs long burrows, 1 metre or 2 long, in the sand and soil of the desert. And it goes in head first. And if you were a snake coming to try and predate this lizard, you can't get past its tail because you're coming up against all this spiky skin. Yeah. So it's protection, fat store, and it's an amazing creature. It's a bit like a tortoise without a shell in some respects, because they feed in the
very similar.
The same, yeah, it has indeed, yeah. So if you feel, it's got lots of scales on its skin, but they're quite small here, but they are nevertheless very scaly, and on its underside it's got lots and lots of scales too. Mm-hmm. And its claws are very, very sharp, and that's because it spends a lot of time digging. So it would dig out these long, long burrows. I've tried to dig them out in the past, and you need a quite big JCB if you're to do it properly. Wow. You're going for so far underground. And they can cope with really cold conditions. So sometimes in the Sahara at night, it gets down to nearly freezing, but they're tucked away safely in their burrow, and they will emerge when the sun comes out in the morning and then sit around and eat all the vegetation.
That's fascinating. I know that you've got some other reptiles that are going to link to this handout as well. So should we get those out to have a look?
Yeah, of course.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. So we've got these 2 very different reptiles with some similar adaptations. Is that right?
Well, they're both highly adapted, but in different ways. The first one is the king snake here. It's a beautiful, it's a very gentle snake. These do make good pets, which is why I keep this species. This is from North America. It's from the hotter regions of North America. Now, it's called a king snake, not because it wears a crown, but because it's the king of the snakes, in that it will eat other snakes. Its diet includes small mammals, small birds, lizards, snakes, including the venomous rattlesnake. This snake is well known for killing, constricting, and swallowing rattlesnakes. And it can swallow a rattlesnake nearly the same length of its own body. And that, of course, that meal will last it for weeks and weeks and weeks. The coloration is also an adaptation, because king snakes in different species come in a whole variety of colours, bands, stripes, plain, you name it. You can find a king snake with a pattern like that. But this one mimics another snake. It's pretending to be another snake.
Right.
It's pretending to be a venomous coral snake.
And of course, these kind of colours in the wild usually indicate that something is venomous.
Absolutely warning colours. Now, sometimes these bands here are red, black and white. Sometimes they're red, black and yellow. But they're all meant to put off predators, thinking, cool, that's a brightly coloured snake. I'm not going to eat that or even attempt to eat it because I may get bitten. And so it's protecting itself by being this coloured. There is a little rhyme in America that says, red on black, venom lack, red on yellow, killer fellow. So this one, if you look at the bands, the red is next to the black. So that is venom lack, so it's not venomous.
Okay.
The red isn't next to the yellow or the white. Red on white or red on yellow, killer fellow. So although it's got the coloration, they're not in the same order as a venomous coral snake. So you and I can tell the difference by looking at it, whether it's a coral snake or a king snake. But birds and other animals can't do that. They don't realise that if you go on holiday to South America, that verse doesn't work. All right, because they are in different orders in South America. But in North America, where they develop the phrase,
You'll be okay.
You'll be fine.
Excellent.
So very well adapted. It's a constrictor. It doesn't use venom to kill its prey. It doesn't crush its prey. What it does, it wraps itself around its prey, and then every time the prey breathes out, it tightens its grip so the prey can't breathe in. So it suffocates its prey rather than crush its prey. And then it always swallows a prey from the head end first, because that's the way things are more streamlined.
I'm guessing the chameleon doesn't do any crushing of its prey?
Not at all, only in its mouth, because it's got quite strong jaws, and it does feed on sort of even hard-bodied insects like heavy beetles and things. Now, this is, for adaptation and change, it's an incredible lizard. This is a North African chameleon. You can see it's clinging onto that branch because it's designed to live in trees. But it's perfectly designed to live in trees because its fingers aren't like ours with a thumb and 4 fingers. It's got 3 fingers on one side and a finger and a thumb on the other side, which gives it a much, much better grip as it crawls through the branches. And sometimes, well, you shouldn't do this, but it's quite hard to pull one off a branch because its grip is so powerful. It's also got a prehensile tail. This is one of the few lizard species that isn't able to shed its tail, throw its tail off in terms of for defence. It needs that tail for gripping on, just like some monkeys use a prehensile tail.
I was going to say, it's very similar, isn't it?
It's very similar, and it can actually hang from a branch just by its tail alone. But the adaptations and changes don't stop there, because if you look at the head end, it's got these 2 wonderful eyes, and it's watching me and you at the same time. These eyes are on turrets, and they can swivel around. And one eye can look over there, while the other eye is looking over there. And how its brain copes with that, we can't understand, because we can only look in one direction.
Yes.
When it sees a prey like an insect or a fly in a branch, both those eyes then swing forward, and see the prey, and then it can judge the distance using stereoscopic vision. So when it needs to judge distance, it can do that. And then it's got a tongue that's the same length as its head and body together, that shoots out with a sticky end, seizes the prey on the sticky tip, back into its mouth, and it can eat it. It can also, on top of all that, change colour. Now, it lives in the tree, and if it was active during the day on the leaves, it'd be bright green and you wouldn't be able to see him in the tree. If it was crawling down the trunk of the tree, it'd be brown. They can change the name in that respect. They mainly use colour change to indicate their mood.
Right.
This is a young female. If another young female was nearby, she could look quite angry and nearly go black.
Right.
But that's a mood thing, it's an aggressive thing. And the males can do similar colour changes, and they go different colours to attract a female. So the colour change, as well as being good camouflage, is also an indicator of what the chameleon is thinking at the time.
And is that colour change instant, or does it take a little while?
It's pretty quick. It's not as quick as a squid or a cuttlefish, but it is pretty quick. It can happen over the course of a few minutes.
Wow, fantastic.
There's got weird cells inside the skin where there are pigments which can be moved around more or less at the flick of a switch. And if the pigments are concentrated in little spots, it's one colour, but if they're spread out throughout all the canals that join them, they're a different colour. It's very, very clever.
So with all of that information, you've got enough knowledge there to continue writing about the different reptiles. I think you'll find that they're really scaling new heights when it comes to adapting. So do you think that this is the best adapter of all?
I think it is. I can't think of another reptile that's got so many things going for it. And lots of other reptiles do show some of these qualities, but not many show all of these qualities in one animal. Prehensile tails, gripping feet, long sticky tongue, swivelling eyes. I don't know of anything else other than chameleons that can do that.
That is fascinating. So take a moment now just to finish off those notes on your handouts and discuss which you think is the best at adapting. Now, Mike, chameleons are masters at adapting to their environments rather quickly, but you've got some different reptiles here who have adapted, and they're very noisy, aren't they?
Yeah, you know they're here.
And they've adapted over a very long period of time, haven't they?
They have indeed. We're talking about the tortoises, turtles and terrapins. Turtles evolved in the sea. They were the first ones to evolve, and very quickly they led to the tortoises, which came onto land. So let's have a look at the tortoise. This is a typical tortoise. This one's called a horsefield tortoise, and it's really from Russia and a little bit further west. So it's a European type tortoise. It's not a tropical one. So the first thing you notice is its shell. Mm-hmm. All three, tortoise, turtle and terrapins, have a hard shell. And in the case of a tortoise, it's quite domed. It's quite high. If you look at a turtle, it's quite flat. These are quite high. There's the head. Got 4 legs, very powerful diggers, very strong claws. These things can burrow down into the hardest earth possible, and their shell is more or less round, and that's important because when they dig a burrow, it means they can turn around at the bottom of the burrow and come back out, rather than have to back out. All burrowing tortoises are usually round. The elongated tortoises can't do that because they're the wrong shape. So the legs at the back. The females, this is a male, it's got a big tail. Males have big tails, females have a short tail, and the female that uses these 2 hind legs for digging the hole in which she will lay her eggs. Now, interestingly, the lungs of a tortoise are at the top, which is quite handy if you happen to fall into water, because it means that you can float like this, and your head is near enough to the top of your shell to be able to breathe and you don't drown. They lay eggs, and even though there's not much distance between these two parts of the shell, they lay hard-shelled eggs like that.
Right.
And they're like a bird's egg. They're hard and calcium. So they lay these in a hole in the ground, 4, 6, maybe 8 in the case of a small tortoise like this, and they cover them over, then forget about them. They leave them in the sun, and 3 months later, a little tiny baby tortoise will hatch, and it's called, any ideas?
A creature hatching out?
Yeah.
It's not going to be something like Bob.
No, or Fred. It's
Right.
called a hatchling.
Right.
And we have a 1-year-old tortoise here. So it's taken a year to get that size. And if you look carefully at the scales, the shell scales, you'll see it's like the rings of a tree. There are little circles where it's grown around the edges all sides.
Yes.
So all the little parts of the shell grow equally. You can't age it by the number of rings.
Right.
This is 1 year old, and there's about 6 rings around each shell, each scale. But that's a good indication that it's a healthy tortoise because there's plenty of growth rings on it.
Okay.
Then after 2.5 years, they'll reach this size. Then after about 8 or 9 years, they'll reach this size. And this tortoise is probably about 25 now. Will live for another 25 years at least.
Oh, so that they can live for about 50 years?
50 years, even longer. People have recorded 80 years.
Wow.
The longest living vertebrate is a giant tortoise from Aldabra that we know is at least 240 years old.
Wow.
And it's still alive now. So
Fascinating.
yeah. So they're the tortoises.
So what are the main differences between a tortoise like this and a turtle?
Right. Well, turtles evolved in the sea, and the hard shell is a result of the ribs expanding. If we've got this is a bit of a turtle shell here. There is the original rib running from its backbone down to form the shell, and the bone grew over evolution to expand and expand until this rib actually ended up joined to this rib, so it formed a big bony sheet all over the back and underside of the turtle. Turtle shells, as you can see, they're not very domed, they're flat for swimming, and they don't have claws and legs, they have flippers, front and back. Okay. There's the odd claw you can find on the front of a turtle shell, but that's normally used for mating. When the male finds a female, he uses that little claw to hold on, because you can get washed off when you're into the sea. So they would come ashore every 1 or 2 years to a sandy beach to lay their eggs. And because they do this, and they're such a big animal, they can lay up to 90 or even 100 eggs at a time.
Wow.
They often don't do it every year, maybe every other year, but they return to the same beach where they hatched on maybe 60 years earlier, but they return to the same place every year to breed. And they can breed in the thousands. You get nights where all the turtles come ashore under the cover of darkness, dig up their holes, lay their eggs, and so many are coming ashore, they're actually digging up other nests as they're digging their nests.
Wow.
The idea of that is that you'll flood the market with little hatchlings. When they all hatch, thousands of hatchling turtles go down to the sea in the hope that some will get there without the gulls and the predators and the fish eating them. So that's how the shell is formed. And then when you look at a tortoise shell, you can see all of these meet together. The backbone is here inside the shell, and the shell is made of bone from expanded rib cages like this.
So a turtle's habitat is more to do with being able to swim.
Yes.
And a tortoise is not?
Exactly. They can't swim, they can float. They can float well. And we know that for a fact because when you look at islands like the Galapagos Islands, that it arose from the seabed 2 million years ago and have been separated by 800 kilometres at least of ocean ever since. There are huge tortoises living there. They got there because they floated there from the mainland of South America. And a tortoise can survive at sea for months and months and months without food or anything. And if it was a tortoise that was already mated and were full of eggs, she will have landed on the Galapagos Island and immediately the first year would have had 60 babies from those eggs. So it's quite easy to see how the islands became populated with tortoises, even though those islands have never been connected to the mainland.
Wow.
So they can float very well. Tortoises are vegetarian mainly. They will eat a bit of carrion, and I think that's more to do with getting calcium from the bones than it is from the nutrition of the meat. So I have found them eating even dead turtles on beaches in Greece, where the tortoises will actually eat the bones of those turtles.
Right.
So they take those in, but the rest are really vegetarian. There's the odd one that will take a worm or something. Turtles eat mainly seaweed, aquatic algae, and occasionally things like jellyfish, and the odd fish, but fish are usually too quick. So if a fish is dead or has been caught in a net and thrown over the side, a turtle might come and eat that because it's easy prey, but they can't hunt very well.
And the creature you got here, the very noisy creature, trying to climb up the side there. This isn't a turtle or a tortoise, no?
No, it's halfway between the two. This is called a terrapin. So terrapins probably evolved from tortoises. So turtles lived in the sea, evolved into tortoises that came onto the land, and some of those that were on the land decided to go into fresh water, and they evolved into terrapins. So like a turtle, they've got not so much of a dome shell, it's quite flat because it helps them to swim. They've got claws rather than flippers, because although they do spend a lot of time in the water, they do need to climb out of the water and onto the land, and they actually probably sunbathe around a lake or a river when it's nice and sunny, then plop into the water to escape any danger. And like all the others, they lay hard-shelled eggs, usually in a riverbank in a nice sandy, open, sunny, exposed place where those eggs will incubate and hatch about 3 months later.
And there are different rings on top of the shell here as well, very similar to the tortoise.
There are age rings around each big scale on the shell, but these are markings which are a bit like fingerprints. You can identify each individual terrapin by the little markings that you get on the shell. And on the underside too, there are markings too, which are often unique to the actual specimen as opposed to the species. These, as well as eating some vegetable matter, are really carnivorous. They will eat frogs, small fish, newts, aquatic insects, anything like that. They'll take the odd bit of vegetation as well. So just to summarise, turtles evolved and they live in the sea, and they come ashore to lay their eggs on sandy beaches maybe once a year. Tortoises evolved from turtles and live on land and are almost entirely land dwellers. They might cross a little pond or a stream, but they don't swim that well. They can float, but they don't swim well, so they live on land. And the terrapin lives halfway between the two. So it spends 50% of its time in fresh water and 50% of its time on land. So turtle, terrapin, tortoise. And here's a little baby terrapin to give you an idea what they look like when they hatch from the, that's 2 weeks old.
And a very long little tail.
Long tail at the moment, that will reduce in comparative size as it grows.
And it will grow from this sort of size to the size you got.
This one here, that was about 3 years old, so it takes about 3 years.
Wow. Well, that is really turtly awesome. You're not enjoying these jokes, are you, Mike? I wonder if we can celebrate our new turtle knowledge with the next activity. Your task is to compare a turtle and a tortoise. Use the provided handout and a handy image as your guide. You need to label the turtle and the tortoise with their adaptations and their key differences. For an extra challenge, see if you can include an interesting fact about the terrapin as well. Wow, so Mike, on behalf of DE and all the amazing schools watching, thank you. We've had so many questions come in for you over the last few weeks. The most asked question was, what's your favourite reptile and why?
Okay, well, I'd like to say a frill lizard, but I have a more favourite reptile than a frill lizard. There is another group of reptiles we haven't discussed, a very small group. It's called a Tuatara. And it's, you know, if you've got the crocodiles, the turtles, the lizards, the snakes, there's a separate group called the Rhynchocephalia, the Tuataras. And I read about this animal since I was about 6 years old, and they come from a tiny island in New Zealand. Now, the thing about the Tuatara is that we had fossils of this animal that were 60 million years old before the live animal was discovered.
Wow.
And when they discovered it and examined it, they realised that this was exactly the same as a 60 million year old fossil. And this lizard-like animal, it's not a proper lizard, but it looks like a big lizard, about 1/2 metre long. It lives on an island now between the north and the south island of New Zealand. It's called Stevens Island. It's a tiny rocky island with 300 metre cliffs all around it. And the only way on is by helicopter. And in about 1984, I had the real privilege of being landed on the island for a week by myself. And I stayed in a shack on the island surrounded by 10,000 Tuataras. Wow. And it was one of the greatest things I've ever done, because you would walk around during the day and there'd be a few seabirds about. You go out there at night and you go into this very sort of shady forest there, and the floor was just a honeycomb of burrows. And the Tuataras emerged from those burrows at night, that they shared with seabirds. And they just stomped around. And now it could be 50 degrees Fahrenheit, chilly night with a mist, and these reptiles were active. They were walking around, they were catching giant crickets and small geckos and things and feeding on them. And the thrill of spending a whole week with all these animals, taking photographs, taking film, was just amazing. Since then, a second species has been discovered on a small island nearby called the Brothers. So there are now 2 species of Tuataras in New Zealand, and sadly I've yet to meet the second species.
Well, hopefully in the future you will.
Thank you.
And Mike, thank you very, very much for coming in today, and of course bringing all of your amazing special guests.
It's a pleasure for all of us.
I wonder if there was a favourite one for anybody watching as well. Well, we've come to the very end of our session today, but we have provided lots of follow-up activities for you to complete. As always, please share any photos with us on social media. We'd really love to see your work and show it off as well. We'll leave you to do this last activity on your handout. Using the evolution timeline on the handout, consider the environmental factors that may have driven their adaptations and changes over time. Focus on how these factors influence physical features like body size, scales, or even the loss of limbs. See if you can connect these changes to the reptiles from the live lesson, and think critically about the reasons behind these evolutionary developments. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your science week. Bye-bye.